Emma Sullivan stood at the edge of her small vegetable garden, wiping sweat from her brow as the merciless Arizona sun beat down on her weathered cotton dress. Her eyes constantly scanned the horizon, a habit formed from months of living in perpetual vigilance. The small homestead nestled at the foothills of the Dragoon Mountains was both her sanctuary and her prison, since James had been killed. "Mama, look what I found." 5-year-old Thomas came running, his small boots kicking up dust, clutching something in his palm. Emma's heart lurched, as it did whenever her son wandered out of sight. "Thomas, what have I told you about staying where I can see you?" The boy's excitement dimmed, but he opened his palm to reveal a piece of polished turquoise. "It was just by the creek, Mama. I didn't go far." She knelt down, examining the smooth stone. "It's beautiful, sweetheart. But remember our rule. Never beyond the cottonwood." Thomas nodded solemnly. At 5 years old, he had already learned the harsh lessons of frontier life. His father's absence hung between them like a phantom, unmentioned but ever present. Emma pocketed the turquoise and returned to her work, memories of that terrible day 8 months ago flooding back unbidden. The Barton gang had descended upon their homestead demanding protection money from the few scattered settlers in the territory. James had refused. The argument escalated quickly, and before Emma could even scream, her husband lay dying in the dust, blood seeping from his chest. "We'll be back for what's ours," Hank Barton had promised, his cruel eyes lingering on Emma before he and his men rode away. Since that day, Emma had worked herself to exhaustion maintaining the small ranch, knowing it was only a matter of time before Barton made good on his threat. The nearest town, Willow Springs, was a half-day's ride away, and the few neighbors within miles had their own troubles. Sheriff Miller made his rounds once a month at best, and Emma knew better than to rely on his protection. As dusk approached, Emma ushered Thomas inside their modest cabin. After securing the door and windows, she sat by the fireplace, mending one of Thomas's shirts by lamplight. "Why don't we go back to Boston, Mama?" Thomas asked suddenly, playing with a wooden horse James had carved for him. "Aunt Beatrice would let us stay." Emma's hands stilled. "This land is ours, Thomas. Your father believed in what we were building here." She brushed his hair from his forehead. "And returning east with nothing but our grief would prove my father right about marrying your pa." She didn't add that her family had disowned her when she'd chosen to marry James, a man with dreams bigger than his pockets. Her father's last words still stung. "You've made your bed with that dreamer, Emma. Don't come crawling back when reality dawns." Later, with Thomas asleep in the small bedroom they shared, Emma sat on the porch with her husband's old rifle across her lap. The night was clear, stars blazing across the vast darkness, coyotes yipping in the distance. In these quiet moments, loneliness threatened to overwhelm her. The cabin stood isolated against the vast wilderness, a tiny outpost of civilization in a land that seemed determined to reclaim it. Emma ran her fingers along the rough-hewn logs James had cut and positioned himself. Every inch of this place held his memory, from the slightly uneven floorboards in the kitchen to the carefully crafted shelves that held their few books. "I won't let them take what's ours," she whispered to the night. "I promised you, James." But promises were easier made than kept in this harsh territory. Last week their only milk cow had fallen ill, and Emma had stayed up 3 nights nursing the animal, knowing that without it, Thomas would have no milk through the coming winter. The vegetable garden required constant attention to keep from withering in the relentless heat. The roof leaked in 2 places when it rained. And always, there was the threat of Barton's return hanging over them like a storm cloud. Emma checked her rifle, making sure it was loaded and ready. 6 bullets. Not enough if Barton brought his whole gang. She would need to visit Willow Springs soon to trade for more ammunition, though she had little to barter with. Perhaps some of the preserves she'd put up from summer berries would fetch a fair price. Day Coyote howled closer than before, followed by the nervous whicker of her mare in the small corral. Emma stiffened, peering into the darkness. Sometimes coyotes were just coyotes, but other times they signaled the presence of something or someone disturbing the night. She rose silently, moving to the corner of the porch where shadows concealed her. Another sound caught her attention, not animal, but not quite human either. A whisper of movement, too deliberate for wind. Emma raised her rifle, finger resting near the trigger. "Who's there?" she called, voice steady despite her racing heart. "I'm armed." Silence answered her, but Emma's instincts, sharpened by months of solitary vigilance, told her she was being watched. She scanned the darkness, eyes straining. For a moment she thought she glimpsed a silhouette against the starlit sky, high on the ridge that bordered their property to the west. Then it was gone, if it had ever been there at all. Unknown to Emma, less than a quarter-mile away, hidden among the shadows of a rocky outcropping, a pair of dark eyes watched the small cabin. Tocho, war chief of a small band of Chiricahua Apache, had been observing the white woman and her son for months. He had witnessed the murder of her husband, though he had been too far away to intervene. The woman intrigued him. Most white women he had encountered feared the wilderness, clustering in towns or larger settlements, dependent on their men for protection. This one was different. She worked the land with knowledge and determination, handled weapons with confidence, and protected her young one with fierce devotion. Tocho shifted his position, careful to remain hidden. The night wind carried the scent of wood smoke from her chimney, mixing with the desert sage and juniper that clung to the rocky slopes. His people had considered these mountains sacred, long before white settlers arrived with their paper claims and wooden structures. 3 years ago, Tocho would have viewed any encroachment on Apache lands with hostility. He would have seen this woman and her child as enemies to be driven away or worse. But that was before American soldiers had slaughtered his wife Nylin and infant daughter in a dawn raid on their camp. That was before he had witnessed the same grief he carried, reflected in this white woman's eyes. Grief, he had discovered, looked the same regardless of skin color. 2 nights ago, Tocho had tracked 5 riders scouting near the woman's land. He recognized them as the same men who had killed her husband. They had camped at the creek that marked the eastern boundary of her property, drinking from bottles and boasting of their plans. The leader, Barton, had spoken of the woman in ways that had made Tocho's hand tighten around his knife. "I'll tame that wildcat," the white man had slurred, "once she sees what happens to those who resist." Tocho had considered killing them as they slept. It would have been simple enough, 5 drunken men unprepared for an Apache warrior's silent approach, but such an action would have consequences beyond these men. The blue-coat soldiers would blame his people, using it as excuse for more raids, more deaths. Instead, Tocho had returned to his small band's camp in the high mountains and sought the counsel of the elders. The old ones had listened to his strange concern for the white woman and her son, their faces impassive. "Why does this settler woman matter to you?" Naiche, the oldest and wisest among them, had asked. "Many whites die in this land. It is not our concern." Tocho had no easy answer. "She fights like Apache," he had finally said, "not like white woman, and her son has brave eyes." Naiche had studied him thoughtfully. "You have carried death in your heart since Nylin and the little one were taken. Perhaps the Creator shows you this woman and boy for a reason." That night, in the solitude of his blankets beneath the stars, Tocho had dreamed of Nylin. She had come to him not as the broken body he had found after the soldiers left, but whole and beautiful, her smile radiant as she placed their daughter in his arms. "Life continues," she had said in the dream, "even after great loss. This is the way." He had awakened with tears on his face, the first he had shed since burying his family. Now, as Tocho watched Emma Sullivan move cautiously around her porch, rifle ready, he made a decision. Tomorrow he would speak with the tribal elders again. The woman's homestead sat at the edge of territory his people had long considered theirs. But in these changing times, with white settlers and the blue-coat soldiers pushing ever westward, traditional boundaries held little meaning. Still, this small patch of land and this woman who worked it with such determination had become significant to him for reasons he could not fully explain. As Emma finally retired indoors, Tocho rose from his hiding place. In the starlight, he could see tracks in the dust where Barton's scouts had passed again today, while the woman was busy at her garden. They were growing bolder, coming closer to the cabin each time. Soon, they would make their move. Tocho slipped away into the night, moving like a shadow through the landscape he knew as intimately as his own body. His people faced enough challenges without him developing strange feelings for a white woman. Yet, as he disappeared into the darkness, he knew he would return. For now he would continue his silent vigil, a protector unknown to the one he protected. In the small cabin, Emma checked on Thomas one last time before sliding into bed beside him. The boy slept peacefully, one arm thrown above his head, his breathing deep and steady. She brushed a lock of dark hair from his forehead, marveling at how much he resembled James. "We'll be all right," she whispered to her sleeping son, willing herself to believe it. "Somehow we'll find a way." Outside, a coyote howled again, its cry echoing across the vast wilderness. But this time, Emma didn't fear it. Instead, she found herself drawing strange comfort from the wildness of the sound, a reminder that in this harsh land, survival came to those who adapted, those who persevered, those who recognized allies where others saw only enemies. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. For now, Emma allowed exhaustion to claim her, drifting into sleep beneath the star-filled Arizona sky, unaware that her fate had already become entwined with that of the warrior watching over her homestead from the shadows of the ancient Dragoon Mountains. 3 weeks later, Emma jolted awake to the sound of hoofbeats approaching. The pre-dawn light barely filtered through the cabin windows as she grabbed her rifle and peered outside. 5 riders approached from the east, their silhouettes unmistakable against the lightening sky. "Thomas," she whispered urgently, shaking her son awake. "Remember what we practiced? Go to the hiding place, now." The boy, still half asleep, nodded and scrambled under the loose floorboards in the pantry, a small space Emma had created for exactly this purpose. She handed him a canteen of water and kissed his forehead. "Not a sound until I come for you. If I don't," her voice caught, "if strangers come instead, wait until nightfall and run toward the dragoons. Remember the trail we practiced." Thomas nodded, his eyes wide with fear. "Good boy," Emma whispered, replacing the floorboards and covering them with a small rug and barrel. She checked her rifle. Only 6 bullets remained. Taking a deep breath, Emma positioned herself by the window, heart hammering against her ribs. Her palms were slick with sweat as she steadied the weapon. She had practiced shooting with James many times, but taking aim at live targets, at men, was different. Could she pull the trigger when the moment came? Emma pushed the doubt away. For Thomas, she would do whatever necessary. The riders stopped about 50 yards from the cabin. Hank Barton sat atop a chestnut stallion, flanked by his brother Jem and 3 other rough-looking men. Their faces were hard in the dawn light, unshaven and weather-beaten. Guns hung prominently at their sides. "Mrs. Sullivan," Barton called out, his voice carrying across the morning stillness. "I hope you've reconsidered our business proposition." Emma remained silent, rifle ready. She noticed how Barton's men spread out slightly, positioning themselves to surround the cabin. They had done this before. "Your husband made a poor choice, ma'am," Barton continued. "I'm offering you a better one. This land sits on a good water source. The railroad surveyors have been through. In a year or 2, this worthless dirt will be worth something. Sign it over to me and I'll see you safely back to civilization." The mention of railroad surveyors confirmed Emma's suspicions. James had heard rumors that the Southern Pacific might extend a line through the territory. That's why he'd been so adamant about holding this particular parcel, not just for the reliable spring and decent grazing land, but for its potential future value. "This land is rightfully mine," Emma called back, her voice steadier than she felt. "I have the deed papers. The territorial office recognized our claim." Barton laughed, the sound chilling her blood. "Papers don't mean much out here, ma'am, but I'm a reasonable man. I'll give you until sundown to pack your belongings. You and the boy can leave unharmed. And if I refuse?" Barton's smile vanished. "Then we'll take what we want anyway. And believe me, Mrs. Sullivan, the land won't be all we take." The threat hung in the air, its meaning unmistakable. Emma's finger tightened on the trigger, aiming at Barton's chest. One shot. She could take him down before the others reacted. But then what? She couldn't possibly reload fast enough to take out the remaining 4 men. As if reading her thoughts, Barton's smile returned. "Think carefully, Mrs. Sullivan. That boy of yours deserves a mother, don't you think?" With that, the men turned their horses and rode toward a stand of cottonwoods near the creek, still on her property, but far enough to give the illusion of privacy. Emma watched until they disappeared among the trees, then sank to the floor, legs suddenly weak. She retrieved Thomas from his hiding place, holding him tightly as he asked in a small voice, "Are the bad men gone, Mama?" "Just for now," she answered honestly. "They're giving us time to think." "About what?" Emma smoothed his tousled hair. About what's best for us. She managed to smile. Are you hungry? Let's have some breakfast while we think. As Thomas ate his cornmeal mush, Emma moved purposefully around the cabin, her mind racing. She couldn't possibly defend against 5 armed men. Running was impossible with Thomas. They wouldn't make it a mile before being caught. The nearest neighbor, old Mr. Peterson, was over 3 miles away and nearly deaf. Emma packed essential supplies, food, clothing, her mother's locket, James's pocket watch, and the few coins she had saved. She hid the papers proving their claim to the land in Thomas's shirt. If anything happened to her, perhaps someone would help the boy reach authorities. By mid-afternoon, Emma had formulated a desperate plan. They would slip out after dark and try to reach the Apache territory in the mountains. It was madness. The Apache were known to be hostile to settlers, but she had heard stories of their code of honor. Perhaps they would grant passage through their lands, allowing her and Thomas to reach Fort Bowie, where there were soldiers who might help. As she considered this desperate option, Emma remembered the silhouette she had glimpsed on the ridge nights ago and other strange occurrences around the homestead. Twice she had found deer meat hanging from a tree near their property line, fresh kills that she had gratefully accepted, assuming they were left by a kindly neighbor. Once, after a dust storm had collapsed part of the corral, she had awakened to find it mysteriously repaired. Had someone been watching over them? Could it have been an Apache warrior? The thought seemed impossible, yet she couldn't dismiss it. As sunset approached, Emma retrieved their warmest clothes and the small pack of supplies. She dressed Thomas in layers, explaining they would be taking a journey. "Where are we going, Mama?" he asked, his small face solemn. "To find help," she said simply. "We'll have to be very brave and very quiet." Just as the sun dipped below the horizon, the sound of approaching riders returned. This time, they didn't stop at a distance. "Time's up, Mrs. Sullivan," Barton shouted, dismounting just yards from her porch. Emma positioned Thomas behind her and raised her rifle. "I won't be leaving, Mr. Barton. This land is ours." Barton's face darkened. "Have it your way." He nodded to his men, who spread out, surrounding the small cabin. The first shot splintered the doorframe inches from Emma's head. She fired back, grazing one of Barton's men in the shoulder. Thomas whimpered behind her. "Take the back," Barton ordered 2 of his men. "Flush them out." Emma knew they were trapped. She had 5 bullets left against 4 men, and soon they would be surrounded. In desperation, she scanned the horizon, and then she saw him. On the ridge behind the cabin stood a lone figure on horseback. Even at this distance, his distinctive silhouette marked him as Apache. Emma had seen him before, watching from afar, a presence she had sensed more than seen over the past months. With Barton's men closing in, Emma made a decision born of sheer desperation. Grabbing Thomas, she bolted from the back door toward the ridge, firing once to clear her path. "Run, Thomas," she urged, pulling her son toward the rocky slope. Bullets kicked up dust at their heels. The Apache warrior watched impassively as they struggled up the hillside. When they were halfway to his position, Barton and his men emerged from behind the cabin, guns raised. "Save us," Emma cried out to the warrior, her voice breaking with desperation. "Please save us." For one terrible moment, the Apache remained motionless, his expression unreadable beneath the red headband that marked him as a war chief. Then, with a sharp whistle, he signaled. Suddenly, the ridge came alive with movement. A dozen Apache warriors emerged from hiding places among the rocks, arrows nocked and aimed at Barton's gang. The outlaw's face contorted with fury and fear. "This ain't over," he snarled before signaling his men to retreat. As Barton and his men galloped away, Emma collapsed to her knees, clutching Thomas to her chest. They were alive, for now. But as she looked up at the imposing figure of the Apache chief approaching on horseback, she wondered if they had escaped one danger, only to face another. The warrior dismounted smoothly, his movements fluid and controlled. He stood before them, tall and powerfully built, his dark eyes assessing. Up close, Emma could see the scars on his forearms, the lines of experience etched around his eyes. His face was painted with red ochre in geometric patterns that extended from his forehead to his cheekbones. "I am Tocho," he said in surprisingly good English. "You ask for protection." It wasn't a question, but Emma nodded anyway, one arm still protectively around Thomas. "They will return. They want our land." Tocho studied her face. "Why you stay? No husband, no tribe, just woman and boy. Emma straightened her spine. It's our home, we have nowhere else to go. Something flickered in Tocho's expression. Respect, perhaps, or understanding. He glanced at Thomas, who peered at the warrior with a mixture of fear and fascination. Boy has brave heart, Tocho observed. Like mother. Thomas, to Emma's surprise, stepped slightly forward. Did you leave the deer for us? He asked. And fix our fence? A ghost of a smile touched Tocho's lips. Boy sees much. Yes? I watch. I help sometimes. Why? Emma asked, confusion evident in her voice. Why would you help us? Tocho was silent for a moment, his gaze shifting to the distant horizon where dust still rose from Barton's retreating gang. At first I watch because you are on Apache land, he finally said. Then I see you work hard, protect boy, not afraid of this harsh country. He met her eyes directly. You remind me of someone. Before Emma could respond, one of the other warriors approached, speaking rapidly in Apache. Tocho replied, his voice commanding. My men say Barton men not go far, he translated for Emma. Make camp by creek. Plan return with more men. Emma's heart sank. Then we're still in danger. Tocho nodded. Always danger in this land. Thomas tugged at Emma's skirt. Mama, I'm scared. Emma knelt beside her son. I know, sweetheart, but we're going to be all right. She looked up at Tocho. Can you help us reach Fort Bowie? There are soldiers there who might... Soldiers? Tocho's expression hardened. Blue coats, no help to you. No help to Apache. They break treaties, take land, kill children. Emma flinched at the bitterness in his voice. Of course, she had heard stories of cavalry raids on Apache camps, of broken promises and forced relocations. How naive to think he would trust the army. I'm sorry, she said softly. I didn't think. Tocho's face softened slightly at her apology. You seek protection I can provide. How? Emma asked. I can protect you, he said finally. But there is price. Emma tensed. We have little money. Tocho shook his head. Not want money. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. Apache ways different from white ways. Man without woman, woman without man. This is not good, not safe. A chill ran down Emma's spine as she began to understand. You become my wife, Tocho stated simply. I protect you, Boyland. You keep your home, I join you there. Emma's breath caught in her throat. Marriage to an Apache warrior? It was unthinkable. She would be ostracized by any white community, possibly even arrested under territorial laws prohibiting miscegenation. Yet as Barton's threat echoed in her mind, Emma realized her options were few. Return to the cabin and await certain violence, flee into wilderness with a child, or accept this unexpected proposal. Thomas looked between them, too young to fully comprehend the conversation, but old enough to sense its importance. Is he going to help us, Mama? Emma stroked her son's hair. He's offering to, yes. Tocho crouched down to Thomas's level. I keep bad men away, he said simply. Protect your mother. Teach you to hunt, to track, to be strong warrior. Thomas considered this with the direct seriousness of childhood. Like a new papa? Emma felt her cheeks flush with heat. Thomas, but Tocho merely nodded. If that is what you wish to call me. Emma was struck by his directness, his lack of guile. This was no heated proposal born of passion or romantic notions, but a practical arrangement offered with dignity. Still, the implications were enormous. I need time to think, she managed. Tocho nodded once. 3 sons. I return. He looked toward the valley where dust still rose from Barton's retreating gang. They come back before, we watch. You safe until I return. He whistled again, and most of his warriors melted back into the landscape. 2 remained, taking positions overlooking the cabin. Those men, Emma said, nodding toward the warriors. They'll stay. Watch over you, Tocho confirmed. No harm comes while I am gone. As Tocho mounted his horse, he looked down at Emma one last time. 3 sons, he repeated. Then he was gone, leaving Emma with a choice she feared to make. Emma and Thomas made their way back to the cabin in silence, the 2 Apache sentinels shadowing them at a distance. Inside, the evidence of Barton's brief attack was everywhere. A shattered window, bullet holes in the door, overturned furniture. Why don't you help me clean up? Emma suggested to Thomas, as much to distract herself as him. As they worked, Thomas asked questions about Tocho and the Apache that Emma struggled to answer truthfully, while keeping her responses appropriate for a 5-year-old. "If you married him, would we have to live in a teepee?" Thomas asked, as he gathered scattered books. "The Apache don't live in teepees, sweetheart. They have wickiups, dome-shaped homes made of brush and grass," Emma corrected, remembering what James had told her. "And no, Tocho said we could stay here." "Would I have to call him Papa?" Emma paused in sweeping up broken glass. "No, Thomas, you can call him Tocho." "But he said—" "I know what he said." Emma softened her tone. "But you don't have to do anything you're uncomfortable with. Your father will always be your father, no matter what happens." As dusk fell, Emma prepared a simple supper. Through the window, she could see one of the Apache sentinels perched on a rock outcropping, motionless as a statue. His presence should have been unsettling, but instead, Emma found herself oddly comforted. After putting Thomas to bed, Emma sat at the rough-hewn table, a single candle burning as she considered her options. Returning east was impossible. She had no money for such a journey, and her family had made it clear she wasn't welcome. Staying meant facing Barton's men again, this time perhaps without Apache intervention. And Tocho's proposal? The very idea should have repulsed her. Yet Emma found herself considering it with surprising seriousness. What did she really know about the Apache? Only stories told by settlers and soldiers, tales of savagery and barbarism that didn't align with the man she had met today. A man who had been quietly protecting them for months, who spoke to her son with kindness, who offered a solution that preserved their home and their lives. But marriage? Emma touched her wedding ring, the simple gold band James had given her 6 years ago. What would he think of her even considering such an arrangement? And yet, hadn't James always been practical above all else? "We do what we must to survive," he had told her during their first difficult winter on the frontier. "Pride makes for a cold companion when the wolves are at the door." For 3 days Emma barely slept. She paced the confines of her cabin, jumping at every sound, though the 2 Apache sentinels remained vigilantly posted on the ridge. Thomas, surprisingly, seemed less frightened than curious about their silent protectors. "Are they going to live with us now, Mama?" he asked on the second morning, watching one of the warriors sharpen an arrowhead. "I don't know," Emma answered honestly. How could she explain to a 5-year-old child the decision she faced? On the morning of the 3rd day, Emma stood before the small mirror James had brought all the way from St. Louis as a wedding gift. Her reflection showed a woman she barely recognized. Tanned skin, calloused hands, eyes that had seen too much hardship. What would James want her to do? He had been idealistic, believing in a future where they would prosper on this frontier. But he had also been practical. Survival first, principles second, he'd often said. Marriage to Tocho would ensure their survival. But at what cost? Emma knew nothing of Apache ways, their language, their customs. Would she be expected to abandon her own culture entirely? And what kind of husband would Tocho be? The stories settlers told of Apache warriors were terrifying, tales of brutality and vengeance. Yet the man she had glimpsed seemed different from those stories. He had been watching over them for months, she realized. The mysterious disappearance of 2 wolves that had been stalking their cattle, the unexplained retreat of a group of drifters who had camped too close to their property. Had that been Tocho's doing? As the sun began its descent on the 3rd day, Emma made her decision. She dressed carefully in her best dress, faded blue calico with only one patched tear at the hem. She brushed her auburn hair and pinned it neatly, then scrubbed Thomas's face despite his protests. "Is someone coming to visit?" Thomas asked, squirming away from the wet cloth. "Yes," Emma said. "Someone important. And I need you to be on your best behavior." They were sitting down to a simple supper of cornbread and stew when hoofbeats approached. Emma's hand trembled as she set down her spoon. "Stay inside," she instructed Thomas, moving to the door. Tocho approached alone, his horse a magnificent pinto stallion that pranced nervously as they neared the cabin. He had adorned himself with symbols of his status, an intricate necklace of turquoise and silver, a headband decorated with geometric patterns, an elaborately beaded vest over his buckskin shirt. Emma stepped onto the porch, suddenly conscious of her simple dress and worn boots. "Good evening," she said formally. Tocho dismounted, tying his horse to the hitching post as naturally as if he'd done it 100 times. "You have answer?" he asked, wasting no time on pleasantries. Emma took a deep breath. "Before I give my answer, I need to understand what such an arrangement would mean. What would be expected of me as your wife?" Tocho's expression remained impassive, but his eyes, dark and penetrating, studied her carefully. "You keep your ways in your home. Raise boy as you choose. I protect, hunt, keep bad men away." He paused. "My people not live in fixed places like white people. I come, I go, but always return." "And," Emma hesitated, her cheeks warming, "what of the marital aspects?" For the first time, something like uncertainty crossed Tocho's face. "I not force," he said quietly, "not like white men who take." The simple dignity of his statement moved Emma unexpectedly. She had heard whispers of white settlers abducting native women, of the atrocities committed during raids on indigenous villages. "My people have ceremony," Tocho continued, "but understand if you want white man's paper marriage." Emma almost laughed at the absurdity. No territorial judge would legally marry them. Such a union would exist outside any law recognized by either of their peoples. "Why?" she asked suddenly. "Why would you want this arrangement? There must be women among your own people." A shadow passed over Tocho's features. "Had wife, daughter. Soldiers came 3 summers past." He stopped, the muscle in his jaw tightening. "Since then, no desire for Apache wife. Too much memory." Emma's heart constricted. They shared the same wound, lives shattered by violence, families torn apart. The cabin door creaked open, and Thomas peered out cautiously. "Mama?" Tocho turned, his stern expression softening slightly as he regarded the boy. From within his vest, he produced a small carved wooden figure, a horse intricately detailed despite its small size. He crouched down, offering it to Thomas. "For boy who watches from window, brave boy." Thomas looked to Emma for permission before tentatively accepting the gift. "Thank you," he whispered, examining the carving with wonder. "You make this?" Emma asked, surprised by the craftsmanship. Tocho nodded. "Many nights watching your home? Hands need work?" The image of this warrior sitting in darkness, carving a toy while keeping vigilance over them, shifted something in Emma's perception. "I have conditions," she said abruptly. "If I agree." Tocho straightened, waiting. "Thomas comes first. His safety, his education. I continue teaching him to read and write. We maintain our faith. I read from the Bible and pray as we always have." Tocho nodded once. "I keep my name, Emma Sullivan. Among your people, I will respect your customs when in their presence, but in our home, some of our ways remain." Again Tocho nodded. Emma took a steadying breath. "And we give ourselves time. Time to know one another. Before..." She couldn't finish, but Tocho seemed to understand. "Agreed," he said simply. Then, with surprising gentleness, he added, "Fear makes poor beginning for marriage. Better to start with respect." Emma blinked back unexpected tears. How strange that this man from a culture so different from her own would understand what many white men did not, that consent mattered, that respect must precede intimacy. "Then," Emma said, her voice steadier than she felt, "I accept your proposal, Tocho." The warrior's expression remained stoic, but something in his eyes lightened. 3 days, he said. I bring elder for ceremony, then I bring possessions. He turned to go, then paused. Barton men watched by my warriors. They plan, gather more men. His eyes met hers. When I return, bring more warriors. Make clear this land, this woman, this boy now under Apache protection. After Tocho departed, Emma sat long into the night, wondering at the irrevocable step she had taken. She had agreed to marry a man she barely knew, from a people widely feared among settlers. Yet she felt a curious sense of peace beneath her apprehension. For the first time since James's death, she felt something beyond mere survival was possible. It wasn't love, not yet, perhaps not ever, but it was protection, partnership of a sort. And for a woman alone on the frontier, that was no small thing. The 3 days passed in a blur of anticipation and preparation. Emma cleaned the cabin thoroughly, mended her best clothes, and tried to explain to Thomas what was happening in terms he could understand. "Tocho is going to live with us now, and he'll protect us from the bad men," she told him as they sat on the porch, shelling peas from the garden. Thomas considered this, his small face serious. "Will I have to call him Papa?" "No, sweetheart. You can call him Tocho, but he'll be like a papa." Emma hesitated. "In some ways, yes. He'll teach you things and help take care of us." Thomas was quiet for a moment, his fingers working the pea pods. "I think Papa would be glad we're not alone anymore," he finally said. Emma's throat tightened with emotion. "I think so too, Thomas." On the morning of the third day, Emma woke before dawn. She heated water and bathed thoroughly, then dressed in her blue calico dress. The one James had always said brought out the color of her eyes. She brushed her hair until it shone, securing it at the nape of her neck with her mother's silver comb, one of the few family heirlooms she had kept after her estrangement. As she prepared a special breakfast of Johnny cakes with the last of their honey, Emma tried to quiet the nervous flutter in her stomach. What if Tocho changed his mind? What if his people objected to such a union? What if this was all a terrible mistake? Thomas sensed her anxiety. "Mama, are you scared?" he asked, watching her pace from window to window. Emma forced a smile. "Not scared, just a little nervous. Like the first day of school." The boy nodded sagely. "Like when I had to recite my letters for Reverend Wheeler." "Exactly like that," Emma agreed, grateful for his simple understanding. Mid-morning, the distant sound of horses reached them. Emma smoothed her dress and took Thomas's hand as they stepped onto the porch. The sight that greeted them took her breath away. The Apache wedding ceremony was unlike anything Emma could have imagined. Tocho arrived with a small party, an elderly man whose deeply lined face spoke of immense wisdom, 2 women bearing gifts wrapped in beautifully woven blankets, and 4 warriors who immediately took up protective positions around the property. The elder, whom Tocho introduced as Naiche, spoke no English, but his dignified bearing required no translation. The women, Tocho's sister Istas and his cousin Nata, approached Emma with cautious curiosity. Istas, tall and strong with eyes that missed nothing, presented Emma with a dress of soft buckskin, adorned with intricate beadwork. The message was clear. For the ceremony, Emma would dress as an Apache woman. Emma hesitated only briefly before accepting the gift. "Thank you," she said, trying to convey her gratitude despite the language barrier. "It's beautiful." Istas nodded, a hint of approval in her dark eyes. Through gestures and the few Apache words Tocho translated, the women indicated they would help Emma prepare. Inside the cabin, Emma removed her calico dress and allowed the women to help her into the buckskin garment. It fit surprisingly well, soft against her skin and far more comfortable than her restrictive cotton dresses. Nata then braided Emma's hair, weaving in strands of turquoise beads and small silver ornaments. "For fortune," Tocho translated when Emma questioned the adornments. "Blue stone sacred to my people." When Emma emerged from the cabin, Thomas gasped, "Mama, you look like a princess." Tocho, who had been speaking quietly with Naiche, turned at the boy's exclamation. For a moment, his stoic expression gave way to undisguised admiration. His eyes traveled from the beaded moccasins on her feet to the intricate braids in her hair, and Emma felt herself blush under his gaze. "You honor my people by wearing our ways," he said simply. But the approval in his voice was unmistakable. The ceremony itself was brief but profound. They gathered in the small clearing before the cabin, where Naiche had prepared a circle of cornmeal on the ground. Thomas watched wide-eyed as Tocho led Emma to stand within the circle, facing east. Naiche spoke words in the Apache language that Tocho sometimes translated in whispered fragments. They stood facing each other as Naiche bound their hands together with a cord of braided horsehair. Water was shared from a ceremonial vessel, and cornmeal sprinkled in a circle around them. "He asks Creator to bless union," Tocho explained quietly. "Says man protects, woman nurtures. Together strong like mountains and valleys, apart vulnerable." Emma was struck by the simplicity and beauty of the ceremony. There was no promise of obedience, no mention of submission. Instead, the words spoke of partnership, of complementary strengths, of mutual protection. When it was done, Naiche placed his weathered hands on their bound ones and spoke directly to Emma. Though she couldn't understand his words, the old man's eyes conveyed his meaning: acceptance, welcome, blessing. "He says you now part of our people." Tocho translated. Not just my wife, but daughter of tribe. Emma felt unexpected tears prick her eyes. For so long she had been without family, rejected by her own, widowed on this harsh frontier. Now, in this most unlikely union, she had found belonging again. The Apache visitors had brought food for a feast, venison dried into jerky, corn cakes sweetened with wild honey, berries preserved in fat. They shared the meal in the yard, sitting on blankets spread beneath the cottonwood tree. Despite the language barrier, Emma found herself enjoying the company of Istas and Nata, who seemed to have accepted her more readily than she had expected. Thomas quickly overcame his initial shyness, especially when one of the younger warriors showed him how to use a small bow. By afternoon's end, the boy was proudly displaying his ability to hit a target pinned to a hay bale. "He has good eye," Tocho observed, watching Thomas with something like pride. "We'll make fine hunter someday." As the sun began to set, the Apache visitors prepared to depart, save for 2 warriors who would remain as sentinels. Nietzsche embraced Emma in farewell, speaking words that needed no translation. Istas pressed a small bundle into her hands, herbs and roots, Emma discovered later, for cooking and medicine. That evening, after the visitors had departed, Emma and Tocho sat on the porch as Thomas slept inside. The night was cool, stars brilliant against the vast darkness. Between them lay the unspoken question of sleeping arrangements. "I make camp tonight," Tocho said finally, gesturing toward a flat area near the corral. "Tomorrow bring my belongings, make proper place in home." Relief and something like disappointment mingled in Emma's response. "You don't have to sleep outside, the cabin has room." Tocho shook his head. "Not yet. Boy needs time. You need time." He looked at her directly. "Marriage on paper only until hearts agree." Emma was touched by his sensitivity. "Thank you," she said softly, "for understanding." Tocho reached out, his fingertips lightly touching the turquoise beads still woven in her hair. "Blue stone brings harmony," he said. "New beginnings need harmony." As Emma prepared for bed that night, she caught her reflection in the small mirror. The woman who looked back at her wore Apache beads in her hair and carried herself with a new confidence. Not just a widow struggling to survive, but a woman who had made a bold choice for herself and her child. Outside, she could hear Tocho moving about as he prepared his camp. Her husband. The word still felt strange, applied to this man so different from James, yet there was a rightness to it that she couldn't deny. The following days established a new rhythm to their lives. Tocho brought few personal possessions, weapons, tools, ceremonial items, and clothing, but his presence transformed the homestead. He repaired the roof that had leaked since winter, reinforced the corral, and constructed a smokehouse for preserving meat. Each morning, he disappeared into the wilderness, returning hours later with game or fish or wild plants Emma had never known were edible. He taught her to prepare foods in the Apache way, how to roast agave hearts, how to grind mesquite beans into flour, how to preserve meat for the coming winter. "Land provides," he told her, as they worked side by side cleaning a deer he had killed. "White people try to change land. Apache learn from land." Emma found wisdom in his approach. James had spent countless hours fighting the arid soil, trying to grow crops that thrived in more temperate climates. Tocho instead showed her which native plants could be cultivated, which wild foods could be gathered, how to live in harmony with the harsh landscape rather than battling against it. Thomas, initially shy, quickly became fascinated by Tocho. The warrior taught him to identify animal tracks, to move silently through underbrush, to whistle like different birds for signals. Emma watched their growing bond with a mixture of joy and apprehension. "He needs man to teach," Tocho observed one evening, as they watched Thomas practicing with a small bow Tocho had made for him. "Boy becoming hunter." "His father wanted him to be educated," Emma said, "to read books, attend university someday." Tocho considered this. "Why not both? Apache warriors must know many skills: tracking, hunting, understanding enemies. Books are new skill, like any other." His wisdom surprised her, as it increasingly did. Beneath Tocho's stern exterior lay a thoughtful mind that challenged her preconceptions. One evening, as they sat by the fire after Thomas had gone to bed, Emma found the courage to ask Tocho about his past. "You said soldiers killed your wife and daughter. Would it pain you too much to tell me about them?" Tocho was silent for so long that Emma thought he wouldn't answer. Then, in a voice low and measured, he began to speak. Naylin was daughter of medicine man, beautiful, smart. No plants that heal, no stars that guide. His face softened at the memory, hair like raven's wing, laugh like spring water over stones. Emma could see the love that still lived in him, deep and abiding. Daughter only 2 summers when soldiers come, dawn raid, no warning. His hands clenched. I away hunting. Return to find... He stopped, unable to continue. Emma reached out, touching his arm gently. I'm sorry. Tocho covered her hand with his own. Same pain in your eyes when I first watch you. Pain of one who loses heart. The simple truth of his observation moved Emma deeply. They sat in silence for a time, connected by shared grief, by the understanding that only those who have lost can truly comprehend. Later, as Emma lay in her bed, alone still as Tocho continued to sleep in the small lean-to he had constructed adjacent to the cabin, she reflected on how quickly her world had changed. 2 weeks ago, she had been a desperate widow facing certain violence. Now she was the wife of an Apache war chief, her home protected, her future suddenly less precarious. Yet the greatest change was within herself. The fear that had been her constant companion since James's death had receded, replaced by a cautious hope, not just for survival, but for a life with meaning, with connection, perhaps even, someday, with love. As she drifted towards sleep, Emma heard the soft sound of Tocho's flute from outside, a melody both melancholy and beautiful, echoing under the vast Arizona sky. The music spoke of loss and longing, but also of resilience, of life continuing despite tragedy. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, Emma knew. The world beyond their small homestead would not easily accept the choice she had made. But tonight, listening to the haunting notes of Tocho's flute, she felt a sense of peace she had thought lost forever. 2 worlds had collided in this remote corner of the frontier, and from that collision, something unexpected was emerging. A bridge between cultures, a family formed not by blood but by choice and necessity, a love growing slowly from the ashes of shared grief. Emma closed her eyes, the music washing over her like a blessing. For the first time in many months, she slept without fear. Emma woke to the sound of Thomas's excited chatter coming from outside the cabin. The morning sun streamed through the window as she dressed quickly and stepped onto the porch. The sight before her brought a smile to her face. Thomas sat cross-legged on the ground, watching intently as Tocho demonstrated how to notch an arrow. These past 2 weeks had transformed their homestead. Tocho's presence had brought not just security, but a new vitality to their lives. The corral now held 3 additional horses, Tocho's pinto, and 2 mares he had traded for with neighboring Apache bands. The garden had been expanded with native plants that thrived in the arid soil. Meat dried in the new smokehouse, ensuring they would not go hungry in the winter months ahead. Yet beyond these physical changes, Emma noted a deeper transformation. Thomas laughed more freely now, the shadows of grief receding from his young eyes, and she herself moved with new confidence, no longer starting at every sound from the wilderness. "Good morning," she called, descending the porch steps. Tocho looked up, his normally stern features softening slightly. "Morning comes well," he replied, using an Apache greeting he had taught her. "Boy learns quickly." Thomas held up the small bow proudly. "Tocho says I'll be able to hunt rabbits soon, Mama." "Is that so?" Emma smoothed her son's tousled hair. "Well, then I suppose I should plan for rabbit stew in our future." The domesticity of the moment struck Emma suddenly. How natural it felt, this new family they were forming, different from what she had known with James, but no less real for its differences. As they shared a breakfast of cornmeal porridge sweetened with wild honey, Tocho mentioned that he would be making a trip to his band's current camp in the mountains. "My people move soon to winter grounds," he explained. "Must speak with elders about our protection through cold moons." Emma nodded, understanding the seasonal migration pattern of the Apache. "Will you be gone long?" 2 days, perhaps 3. Tocho's dark eyes held hers. "You be safe. 2 warriors remain nearby." The implication was clear. Barton and his men remained a threat, though they had not dared approach since witnessing the Apache presence. "Will I see where your people live someday?" Thomas asked eagerly. Tocho ruffled the boy's hair, a gesture that had become familiar between them. When time is right. Winter camp better for first visit. More permanent. Many children for you to meet. After breakfast, Tocho prepared for his journey. Emma watched as he checked his weapons and gathered a few small gifts for the elders. Tobacco Emma had traded for in Willow Springs, a jar of honey from their bees. As he mounted his pinto stallion, Tocho looked down at Emma with an intensity that made her cheeks warm. 3 sons, he said, echoing the promise he had made before their marriage. I return. Emma nodded, unexpectedly moved by the parallels. We'll be waiting. As Tocho rode away, Thomas waved enthusiastically. Bye, Tocho, bring me a story. Emma smiled at her son's request. Tocho had begun sharing Apache legends with Thomas in the evenings, tales of coyotes' tricks and mountain spirits' wisdom that the boy absorbed with rapt attention. The day passed peacefully as Emma and Thomas attended to their usual chores. That evening, as they ate their supper, Thomas looked thoughtfully at his mother. Mama, are you happy Tocho is with us now? The directness of the question caught Emma off guard. Yes, she answered honestly. I am, aren't you? Thomas nodded. He's not like Papa. Papa was funny and sang songs. Tocho is quiet, but... He searched for words. I feel safe when he's here, and he teaches me important things. Different isn't bad, Emma said softly. It's just different. That night, Emma lay awake longer than usual, the absence of Tocho's presence near the cabin more noticeable than she had expected. In the 2 weeks since their marriage, she had grown accustomed to the sound of his movements outside, the low melodies of his flute, the sense of protection his presence provided. Their relationship remained chaste, as he had promised. Tocho had not once pressured her for the physical aspects of marriage, seeming content with their growing companionship. Yet Emma found herself increasingly aware of him as a man, his fluid strength as he worked, the rare smile that transformed his stern features, the gentleness of his large hands when he treated a wound on Thomas's knee. The second day of Tocho's absence passed uneventfully. Emma took advantage of the warm weather to wash clothes and bedding, hanging them to dry in the autumn sunshine. As she worked, she found herself humming, a habit she had abandoned after James's death but which now returned naturally. That afternoon, as she and Thomas gathered late-season berries from a thicket near the creek, the sound of approaching horses made Emma stiffen with alarm. She quickly pulled Thomas behind her, scanning the horizon. Relief flooded her when she recognized Mr. Peterson, their elderly neighbor, accompanied by Sheriff Miller from Willow Springs. Still, wariness kept her on guard. The Apache sentinels Tocho had left were nowhere in sight, likely observing from hidden positions. Mrs. Sullivan, Sheriff Miller called as they approached. Afternoon to you. Sheriff, Mr. Peterson. Emma nodded cautiously. What brings you out this way? The men exchanged uncomfortable glances before Sheriff Miller spoke. Well, ma'am, there's been some talk in town. Mr. Peterson here mentioned seeing some unusual activity around your property, Apache warriors. Mr. Peterson's eyes must be improving remarkably, Emma said dryly, knowing the old man could barely see across his own yard. To spot such details from 3 miles distant. The elderly man had the grace to look embarrassed. Weren't me that spotted 'em first. Barton and his boys been spreading stories in town. Said you'd taken up with a savage. Said it weren't natural. Emma's spine stiffened. My arrangements are my own business, gentlemen. Sheriff Miller dismounted, his expression troubled. Mrs. Sullivan, Emma folks are concerned. A widow alone out here with Apaches about. It don't look right. I'm not alone, Emma said firmly, and I'm not in any danger. The sheriff removed his hat, twisting it in his hands. There's laws, ma'am, territorial laws about infraternizing with Indians. I can't just ignore what people are saying. And what exactly are they saying, Sheriff? Emma lifted her chin. Before he could answer, Thomas spoke up. Are you talking about Tocho? He's Mama's new husband. He protects us from the bad men. The shock on both men's faces would have been comical under different circumstances. Sheriff Miller's mouth actually fell open, while Mr. Peterson made a strangled sound of disbelief. Husband? Sheriff Miller finally managed. Ma'am, you can't have married an Apache. It's against territorial law. Such a union wouldn't be recognized. Perhaps not by your laws, Emma replied steadily. But it is recognized by his people. and by God who brings people together for his purposes. The invocation of divine approval was a calculated risk, but Emma knew these men, like most in the territory, considered themselves God-fearing Christians. "This is serious business, Mrs. Sullivan," Sheriff Miller said, recovering his composure. "There could be consequences. The territorial governor takes a dim view of mixed marriages, and yet he takes no view at all of men like Barton terrorizing widows and children," Emma countered. "Where was territorial law when my husband was murdered? Where was it when Barton threatened worse than death if I didn't abandon my legal claim to this land?" The sheriff had the decency to look uncomfortable. "The territory's big, ma'am. Can't be everywhere." "Precisely," Emma said, "which is why I've accepted protection where I found it. Now, if you've delivered your warning, I have chores to finish before sundown." Sheriff Miller replaced his hat. "I'll have to report this to the territorial office." "Do what you must," Emma replied, "as I have done." As the men prepared to leave, Mr. Peterson unexpectedly spoke up. "Emma, girl, think of your boy. What kind of life will he have, raised by a—" He caught himself. "By an Indian?" Emma's expression softened slightly. "A life where he learns respect for the land and its original peoples. A life where he's protected and valued. I could wish worse for him." After the men departed, Emma sat heavily on a fallen log, the brave front she had maintained crumbling now that they were alone. This confrontation had been inevitable, she knew, but facing it so soon had caught her unprepared. "Mama," Thomas's concerned voice brought her back to the present. "Are those men going to make trouble for Tocho?" Emma forced a smile. "Don't worry about grown-up problems, sweetheart. Tocho can take care of himself." She only hoped her words were true. That evening, as she prepared supper, Emma's mind raced with potential consequences of the sheriff's visit. Would there be official action from the territorial government? Would settlers from Willow Springs take matters into their own hands, viewing her marriage as a betrayal of her race? And what of Tocho's people? Would they bear the brunt of any backlash? She was so lost in these worrisome thoughts that she almost missed the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Her hand went instinctively to the rifle propped near the door, but Thomas's excited cry told her who the visitor was. "Tocho's back. Mama, Tocho's back early." Emma stepped onto the porch as Tocho dismounted. One look at his face told her something was wrong. His expression was more severe than usual, his movements tense. "What's happened?" she asked as he approached. "Riders," he said tersely. "Many coming from town. My scouts saw them gathering." His dark eyes searched hers. "Sheriff was here?" Emma nodded. "This afternoon, with our neighbor, Mr. Peterson." Tocho's jaw tightened. "Word spreads fast among white men. They know about our marriage," Emma confirmed. "Thomas told them." To her surprise, Tocho's expression softened as he glanced at the boy. "Truth is not wrong, Thomas, but sometimes dangerous." "How many riders?" Emma asked, returning to the more pressing concern. 15, maybe more. Barton leads them. Some town men join him." Emma's heart sank. Barton had managed to convince townspeople to join his cause, likely painting their union as an abomination that threatened all settlers. "When?" "Dawn," Tocho answered. "They prepare now. Drink courage from bottles." His contempt for this practice was evident. "And your people, will they help us?" Emma tried to keep the fear from her voice for Thomas's sake. Tocho nodded once. "Already called. 25 Apache wait in mountains," he said, echoing his promise from weeks ago. "Barton thinks Apache few scattered. He learns truth tomorrow." Emma felt a chill despite the warm evening. "Thomas should be somewhere safe." "Agreed." Tocho crouched down to the boy's level. "Thomas, tonight you sleep in special place. Like game we play, hiding from enemies." Thomas's eyes widened with a mix of fear and excitement. "The root cellar? Like before?" "Yes, but this time Nata stays with you." "Your cousin?" Emma asked, surprised. Tocho nodded. "She comes now. We'll take boy to cave in foothills. Safe place. Return when danger passes." As if summoned by his words, a slender Apache woman emerged from the gathering dusk. Nata approached silently, her expression solemn, as she greeted Emma with a brief touch to the arm. Emma knelt before Thomas, fighting to keep her composure. "You're going on an adventure with Nata tonight. You must be very brave and do exactly as she says." Thomas looked between his mother and Tocho. Despite his youth, he seemed to understand the gravity of the situation. "Will you come get me after you make the bad men go away?" "Yes," Emma promised, pulling him into a fierce hug. "Very soon." As Nata prepared to take Thomas, gathering the small pack Emma hastily filled with food and his warmest clothes, Tocho spoke quietly to Emma. "If something happens to me tomorrow," he said, "my people will see boys safely to you." The echo of her own words from weeks ago, when she had asked Tocho to take Thomas to her sister should she perish, was not lost on Emma. She reached for his hand, gripping it tightly. "Nothing will happen to either of us," she said, with more conviction than she felt. "We face this together." After Thomas departed with Nata, slipping away through the darkness toward the safety of the mountains, Emma and Tocho prepared for the coming confrontation. Apache warriors arrived silently throughout the night, taking positions around the property. Tocho briefed them in their language, gesturing toward various approaches to the homestead. "What's the plan?" Emma asked as they sat by the fire, the hour growing late. "Show strength first," Tocho explained. "Many men brave until facing greater numbers, may be enough. And if it's not?" Tocho's expression darkened. "Then we fight, but only if necessary." He looked at her directly. "No need for war between my people and whites. Bad for everyone." His wisdom struck Emma anew. Despite having every reason to hate white settlers after the loss of his family, Tocho sought to avoid further bloodshed if possible. "There's something you should know," Emma said quietly. "Sheriff Miller mentioned territorial laws against marriages like ours. There could be legal consequences." Tocho considered this. Laws made by men can be unmade by men, or ignored. A hint of a smile touched his lips. Apache have existed long before white man's laws. As they prepared for sleep, Emma in the cabin, Tocho still in his lean-to despite her offer to share the home, she found herself thinking of the vows they had exchanged. Not the formal words of her Christian wedding to James, but the simple, profound promises of the Apache ceremony. Protection, partnership, respect. Tomorrow would test those vows in ways neither could fully anticipate. Dawn broke misty and cool. Emma, dressed in her own clothes but wearing the turquoise beads Nata had woven into her hair, stood beside Tocho on the porch. Around the property, Apache warriors lay concealed, arrows nocked, rifles ready. When Barton's gang appeared on the horizon, they came with confidence, spreading out in a wide formation. Hank Barton himself rode slightly ahead, a smug smile visible even at a distance. Beside him, Emma recognized several men from Willow Springs, the blacksmith, 2 cattle ranchers, even the young deputy who assisted Sheriff Miller. The smile faltered when Barton saw Tocho standing beside Emma. "Well, Mrs. Sullivan," Barton called, reining in his horse about 50 yards from the cabin, "I see you've found yourself some savage protection. Didn't figure you for an Indian lover." Emma lifted her chin. "This is my husband, Mr. Barton, and this land is under his protection now." Barton spat. "Husband, that's rich. Territory law doesn't recognize marriages between whites and Indians." His eyes narrowed. "Last chance, woman. Leave now with your boy, or things get ugly." Tocho stepped forward. "This land belongs to Emma Sullivan. You leave. Never return." Barton laughed, turning to his men. "Boys, looks like we got ourselves one brave Apache who thinks he can scare us off." He drew his pistol. "Let's show him what we think of—" Before he could finish, a war cry echoed from the ridge behind him. Barton wheeled around to see 24 Apache warriors appearing like ghosts from the landscape, weapons raised. "Surrounded," Tocho stated flatly. "You die today, or you leave forever. Choose." Panic rippled through Barton's men as they realized their disadvantage. Several began to back their horses away, including the young deputy whose face had drained of color. "Hold steady," Barton shouted, but fear had already broken their resolve. "This ain't worth dying for, Hank," one of the men called, turning his horse. Barton's face contorted with rage. In a desperate move, he raised his pistol toward Emma. "If I can't have this land—" Tocho's movement was a blur. His knife flashed in the morning light, striking Barton's arm with precision. The outlaw screamed, his pistol falling as blood spurted from the wound. In an instant, Apache warriors closed in, arrows pointed at the remaining men. "Go," Tocho commanded, his voice thunderous in the morning stillness. "Tell others, this land, this family under Apache protection, any who threaten die slowly." The outlaws fled, dragging the wounded Barton with them. As their dust disappeared over the horizon, Emma released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Tocho turned to her, concern evident in his eyes. "You hurt?" Emma shook her head, suddenly lightheaded with relief. Without thinking, she stepped forward and embraced him. Tocho stiffened momentarily, then his arms came around her, strong and secure. "Thank you," she whispered against his chest. The hours that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Tocho sent scouts to track Barton's retreat, ensuring they truly left the area. Other warriors performed a ceremony of cleansing around the property, burning sage and cedar while chanting softly. By mid-afternoon, Nata returned with Thomas, who burst from the trees and ran straight into Emma's arms. "Mama, we slept in a cave with drawings on the walls, and Nata showed me how to make a fire with sticks." Emma held him tightly, tears of relief stinging her eyes. "That sounds wonderful, sweetheart." That evening, after Thomas had been put to bed, exhausted from his adventure, Emma and Tocho sat side by side on the porch swing James had built during happier times. The Apache warriors had departed to spread word of their victory, leaving them alone for the first time since the confrontation. "The Bartons won't be the last," Emma said softly. "As more settlers come, as the territory changes—" "We face together," Tocho replied. "Apache ways changing too. Some fight, some hide in mountains. I choose different path." He looked at her directly. "Choose to bridge two worlds. For son, for you." Emma realized he had called Thomas son for the first time. The word settled in her heart, filling empty spaces she had thought would remain forever vacant. "I made a promise I feared," she admitted, "but now I find I don't fear it at all." Tocho's hand found hers in the gathering darkness, calloused palm against her work-roughened fingers. Different yet alike, two survivors who had found strength in each other. "Life brings many seasons," Tocho said. "Season of grief ends. New season begins." As the first stars appeared overhead, Emma felt something unfurling within her. Not quite love yet, but its beginning. A promise made in fear was transforming into one embraced with hope. The weeks that followed brought changes both expected and surprising. Sheriff Miller returned once, not with a posse but alone, bearing official papers from the territorial governor. "Technically, your marriage isn't legal under territorial law," he explained uncomfortably. "But the governor's got bigger problems than one widow's domestic arrangements. Long as there's no trouble, he's willing to look the other way." Emma accepted this pragmatic approach with relief. "There won't be trouble from us, Sheriff." "Barton's cleared out," Miller added. "Headed to New Mexico territory after that wound got infected. Doubt he'll be back." As winter settled over the land, their small family established new routines. Tocho built an addition to the cabin, a proper room for himself adjacent to the main structure, connected by a covered walkway. It was a compromise that respected Emma's need for privacy while acknowledging their growing closeness. Thomas thrived under Tocho's guidance, learning the ways of both cultures. In the mornings, Emma taught him reading and numbers from the books James had prized. In the afternoons, Tocho showed him how to track animals in the snow, how to build shelters from natural materials, how to understand the language of birds and wind. One evening, as a rare snowfall blanketed the landscape, Thomas asked a question at supper. "Tocho, in the Apache stories, does the Great Spirit hear everyone's prayers, even if they pray different ways?" Tocho considered the question with the seriousness he always accorded Thomas's inquiries. "Creator hears all voices. Many paths lead to same mountaintop." The boy nodded, satisfied. "That's what I thought. Because Mama prays from her book and you pray with sage smoke, but I think it goes to the same place." Emma and Tocho exchanged glances over the table, a moment of perfect understanding passing between them. That night, after Thomas was asleep, Emma found Tocho sitting by the fire, carving a new figure from cedar wood. She sat beside him, watching his skilled hands shape the material. "What are you making?" she asked. "Eagle," he replied. "Symbol of vision, of seeing far." Emma studied his profile in the firelight, the strong line of his jaw, the proud nose, the eyes that had seen so much hardship, yet remained capable of kindness. "Tocho," she said softly. I think it's time." He looked up, his hands stilling on the carving. "Time? For us to truly be husband and wife?" Emma felt her cheeks warm, but she held his gaze. if you still want that." Tocho set aside the carving, turning to face her fully. "Want has never been questioned," he said, his voice deepening. "Respect was." "I know." Emma reached out, touching his face gently. "And that respect has become more. Much more." Tocho's hand covered hers, pressing her palm against his cheek. "You sure? No fear?" "No fear," Emma confirmed. "Only certainty." Later, as they lay together in the new room Tocho had built, the winter wind singing around the eaves, Emma marveled at the journey that had brought them to this moment, from desperate plea to sacred promise, from arrangement of necessity to union of choice. Thomas's voice called from inside the main cabin, breaking the moment. "Mama? Tocho? Can we have a story tonight?" Emma smiled. "We're coming," she called back. Rising, she kept her hand in Tocho's, leading him toward the warm light of the cabin, their home. In the doorway, she paused, looking up at the man who had changed everything. "I'm glad you heard me that day," she said softly, "when I begged you to save us." Tocho's eyes held hers, the depths of feeling there no longer hidden behind a warrior's mask. "I heard you many days before," he said, "watching your strength, your care for son. You saved yourself many times. I merely helped." As they stepped inside together, Emma knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, from prejudice, from change, from the collision of their different worlds, they would face them as they stood now, side by side, a family forged not from fear, but from respect, growing slowly but surely toward love. As I reflect on Emma and Tocho's journey, I'm struck by how the most profound connections often emerge from our most desperate moments. Their story reminds us that love doesn't always announce itself with thunderclaps and passion. Sometimes it arrives quietly, built brick by brick on the foundation of respect, shared purpose, and the courage to see beyond the boundaries others have drawn for us. In the harsh landscape of the American frontier, Emma and Tocho found something rare, the ability to truly see each other, not as categories or symbols, but as human beings carrying both wounds and wisdom. Their unlikely union speaks to a truth that transcends time and place, that in our deepest vulnerability, we sometimes discover our greatest strength, especially when we allow someone else to witness both. What began as a transaction of safety became a testament to how love can grow in the spaces between cultures, between expectations, between what we're taught to want and what our hearts truly need. Tocho's patient reverence for Emma's boundaries and Emma's willingness to question her own preconceptions created something beautiful amid the harshness of their world. Perhaps most moving is how their relationship transformed not just their own lives, but created a new possibility for young Thomas, a child who learned that family isn't defined by blood or background, but by the daily acts of protection, guidance, and gentle care. Through his innocent eyes, we see how prejudice is learned, not innate, and how wisdom can be gathered from multiple traditions. Their story isn't one of perfect resolution or easy answers. The world beyond their homestead remains fraught with prejudice and conflict. Yet in choosing each other day after day, Emma and Tocho create a small revolution, a pocket of possibility that suggests different worlds can not only coexist, but enrich one another. In the end, isn't that the most profound form of love? Not the kind that demands sameness or simplicity, but the kind that recognizes our differences and says, here, in this space between us, something new and beautiful can grow. Something that neither of us could have created alone. The Apache warrior who answered a desperate plea, and the widow who dared to reimagine her future, remind us that sometimes the greatest journeys of the heart begin with the simplest of human needs. To be seen, to be safe, to belong, and in that belonging, to become more fully ourselves than we ever thought possible. Thank you so much for staying with us until the end. If this story moved your heart like it moved ours, please support our channel by giving it a like, leaving a comment, and sharing it with someone who loves emotional stories full of love, redemption, and second chances. From the bottom of our hearts, thank you for being here. Your support truly helps us stay motivated to keep telling new stories that touch the soul. And please don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new journey with us. At the end of this video, you'll see another suggested story appear. Click on it and be surprised by more emotional tales just like this one.